Hello, everyone. Welcome to Food Integrity Now. I'm Carol Gervais, and I'm the host of the show. And I was thinking just before I got on, it's March 2026, and I started doing Food Integrity Now in March of 2010. So this is 16 years of doing podcasts and interviews and fighting the bad guys and all of that. So we're going to keep going. But today I have an amazing guest. I have Kelly Ryerson. She is recognized on Instagram as the Glyphosate Girl. She is a prominent voice and activist, and she talks about pesticides and regenerative agriculture. She serves as the co-executive director of American Regeneration and is the founder of the news platform Glyphosate Facts. Kelly, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be back. You were
Yeah.
my very first interview back in 2018.
Oh my God, you're kidding.
No, first
Well,
one. Got me going.
yeah. Well, a lot has happened and there's still a lot happening. So we're going to be talking about that. But I thought it would be interesting, especially for some of my newer listeners, to have you just briefly explain how you got the name the Glyphosate Girl.
Yes, so this is not something I ever planned. What happened is like many people, had chronic illness that was very vague and very debilitating. So things like rashes and neuropathy and hair loss and autoimmune numbers not great, but no specific autoimmune condition. And I was able to fix it through clean eating and giving up gluten. And when I gave up gluten, I started wondering why so many people couldn't tolerate gluten anymore. And I went to a conference at Columbia University where we were listening to different scientists hypothesize what might be going on in our food supply or what's going on with gluten sensitivity. And it struck me that maybe something was happening on the farm that had maybe changed the grain. And so I went to the microphone and I said, "Hey, is anything happening out on the farm that might be contributing to this epidemic of or gluten sensitivity?" Not glyphosate, wasn't in the picture yet. And they didn't know what was happening on the farm. But later on that day, a scientist from General Mills found me and he said, "Yeah, well, actually, right before harvest, a lot of the grain is sprayed with Roundup." And I said, "You mean like the weed killer that we see in Home Depot?" And he said, "Yeah, that's the one because it makes for an easier harvest." And I was like, that does not sound like a good idea. Not knowing much, that just logically didn't sound like a good idea. And so I started a deep dive on glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, and met with many scientists talking about all the different issues we have with glyphosate impacting our many different systems in our body. And about a year later, the glyphosate cancer trials were beginning in San Francisco, which is where I was living at the time. And so I decided I was going to go to the cancer trial, went and realized that mainstream media wasn't covering it to a very large extent at all. And so I decided I'm going to quit my job at the time as a health coach, and I'm going to be writing every day what happens in this courtroom. And so I came up with the name Glyphosate Girl, and it got quite a following. And I thought I did Glyphosate Girl because I wanted it to be anonymous because I was scared of Monsanto. And but they knew who I was really quickly.
Yeah, I bet.
And so since then I have had I continued on the path of just understanding pesticide use and understanding alternatives, and that regenerative agriculture is a way out of this situation. But we still have the same issues with glyphosate exist now as did 10 or 20 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. It's just so ubiquitous, and but we keep trying. We keep trying to get it banned or regulated more, and I want to talk with you about that today because a lot of people know that Trump signed this executive order saying that we really needed glyphosate for national security. So, what do you think about that?
This was just such an unnecessary move on the part of Trump. I don't I like really have a hard time even wrapping my head around it because I've been very active in the Make America Healthy Again movement. It is our banner pesticide. I think not just for MAHA, but I think anyone who's concerned about what they're eating, glyphosate is usually oftentimes the only pesticide people know about. And it's the most used in the country. So I would say that if this were truly about being concerned about glyphosate supply, that there could have been some quiet decisions made behind the scenes that we would start sourcing or mining exclusively in the United States. There was no need for an executive order. What that executive order was actually about was to signal to Bayer, to the Supreme Court, and to Congress people that the White House was going to be just fine with continuing to steal our rights around suing pesticide manufacturers. And that's sort of a separate issue that I could expand on too.
Wow. Yeah. And well, let's talk about that issue since you brought that up. So the pesticide immunity has happened and it got snuck through the Farm Bill. And where are we with that now?
So there are several different things that Bayer has been attempting to do to try to mitigate its losses from these huge cancer lawsuits. Now, the number one thing they could do is just put a label on their on their chemical and say some people, like, literally don't even have to say it causes cancer. They could say at this point some research shows it might be causes cancer. The EPA disagrees, and then they could be off the hook for all this liability. But no, they won't do that. They keep on tripling down with the fact that this does not cause cancer, even though this evidence is so overwhelming that it causes cancer. That's just an aside. Instead of just being truthful about the science, they're instead just going to try and take away all of the lawsuits. So the way that they are going to do this, and they proposed it in the first place like a couple of years ago, and I looked at that, and I think the lawyers looked at that and thought there's no way they can do this. Their plan was to go state by state and then also at the federal level and just make it so that no one can sue pesticide manufacturers when they get sick from exposure. Now, that is such an outrageous thing to even think about doing. Like, that seems so far-fetched that it wasn't even really on my radar that that could ever happen either. But they put millions and millions of dollars into it, started marching through our country, stealing our rights, because they have successfully in North Dakota and in Georgia taken away the right to sue. If you live in those states and you get sick from any pest, 57,000 different pesticides, you can no longer sue the manufacturer for failing to warn that it could cause cancer or ALS or Parkinson's or whatever. And so they're trying to pass this in 21 different states. And right now it's looking not great in Kentucky or Kansas. Then at the same time, they're trying to pass one federally. And so they've tried on several different occasions to slide this liability shield into different legislation, like the huge spending bill, to make it harder. They try and put it in these larger bills to make it easier to just pass through, because when they try just with an individual bill, they don't get very far. But if you tuck it in with a big spending bill with all these other issues loaded in, it's more likely to pass through. So we fought really hard. We got it out of the big spending bill. Lo and behold, G.T. Thompson, who's the Republican head of the Agriculture Committee in the House, said he's just committed to giving farmers this protection by passing this liability shield. So not only was that put into the Farm Bill, but also they are looking to strip the rights of states and local communities from being able to do any kind of regulation at all with pesticides. I mean, so all those towns, the schools, the people that have been able to get pesticides off of their grounds, that would no longer hold. So that is also involved in the Farm Bill. So now that passed out of Agriculture Committee, and now it'll go to eventually to a House floor vote for the Farm Bill. Whether or not it passes, I don't know. With a Republican majority, it probably is more likely to pass. But that being said, I don't want to let the Democrats off the hook at all, because most of them don't care about this issue. It's a few that do, and they rally everyone. But by and large, that is none of the politicians care about this. And yeah. Bayer has their grips into both sides.
This is just unfathomable. I mean, can you give our listeners 5 reasons why they should care about glyphosate being in their food?
Absolutely. So glyphosate, my main concern, so we have the cancer, obviously. Cancer it's connected to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, but also other cancers. as well, including breast cancer. So there are different modalities. There aren't lawsuits around those other types of cancer just because there isn't enough research to go and have a big, expensive case to sue. But research does link it to different types of cancer. Second is the destruction of the microbiome. So the glyphosate goes and works specifically on beneficial gut bacteria, which is the bacteria that does so many things for us and really we understand now is really crucial to health. It's root cause medicine, usually is found in the gut. How do we heal our gut? And it is straight, glyphosate does work as an antibiotic, but only on our beneficial gut bacteria, not on the things like E. coli. It doesn't touch that. It lets that proliferate. And I think that's a big part of the issue of what's happening here. It's also an endocrine disruptor. And I actually went to the EPA now 2 times complaining about how this is an endocrine disruptor. And there's so much research that shows it's messing with our hormones, including testosterone and estrogen. And it is also changing the genitalia of our baby girls. Glyphosate exposure, there was a study that came out of Mount Sinai Hospital where they measured the glyphosate content in the urine of second trimester women, and then they measured the distance between the anus and the vagina of the baby girls. And the higher the glyphosate level, the longer the distance between the vagina and the anus, meaning that's an androgenization of the baby. And that was like a mainstream study that should have just shocked so many people and did not. It's also found in semen and it's been shown to kill sperm. We have crashing sperm counts in this country. It's down 50% over the last 50 years, interestingly, at the time that we've been using glyphosate. So that too is another concern. It's also connected to kidney disease and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Those two are rapidly increasing, especially the liver disease. There's so many things it's connected to because it's also been connected to issues with our neurological system. And it's been shown to cross the blood-brain barrier, the blood-testes barrier. And it's been contributing to also autoimmunity just through that microbiome pathway that I was talking about earlier. So there's so many reasons if you're into health that you should be just very concerned about glyphosate.
You know, when you were talking about the how it androgenizes, I was thinking when I interviewed way back, and I don't even know what year it was. It was early on, but Tyrone Hayes about
Oh, yeah.
atrazine, and atrazine does the same things. They had studies on frogs, and he actually found this out and had all the proof, and he was silenced. Well, they tried to silence him, but he was able to. I think he sued, and because they were harassing him and everything. The Syngenta, they did not want that truth out. So it's kind of the same playbook.
Oh, it is totally the same playbook. And it's just remarkable to me that anyone is willing to sacrifice our hormones and our ability to reproduce. Because,
Yeah.
and I look at everyone that is silencing, and I'm thinking, you have kids and you presumably want grandkids. So it's so confusing to me when you have this information to continue to double down on passing policy and being corrupt when you know it's going to impact you, like yourself
Yeah.
too.
Kelly, so how are we doing? Are we making any progress with stopping the use of glyphosate to be used as a desiccant?
That is an area that we are really pushing hard on because we feel like there might be an opening to get rid of that, especially because the glyphosate executive order was so horrible for the MAHA movement that we are hoping that we get some kind of win in response to that big blow. But one thing that is really hard is to actually quantify how much glyphosate is being used for desiccation. We actually don't know. What we know is that it is showing up in our food, right? When we test our food and we see grain products are really high. But a lot of farmers have actually specifically reached out and said, I don't do that. I don't know any farmers who do that. You start asking around in farming communities and it's not something that people will readily admit to doing, and then some don't. And so it's been really, the USDA isn't recording it, and so they don't really know how widespread the practice is. And then the other issue we have is that a lot of our grain is imported from Canada, and we know that they do a lot of pre-harvest desiccation. So it's now becoming kind of multifactorial where can we do halt on all synthetic desiccation because they'll swap glyphosate out with diquat, paraquat, or glufosinate. So no synthetic desiccation, but also we're not going to import grain that's been sprayed either. Kind of they both need to happen in order to decrease our exposure, but those are conversations that are happening. And in fact, it was something that recently, when right after the executive order, the Maha Commission, which was all the agencies together, came out with this announcement. Oh, actually, we're going to look into decreasing pesticide exposure. And one of the things was, I think, a $30 million prize from the EPA to go to the person or people that can come up with solutions to not do pre-harvest desiccation. So that was interesting, and maybe that's a political grab that we can get to decrease our exposure.
Yeah. Just so our listeners know, desiccation means that it's pre-harvest where they spray the wheat or whatever the crop is with glyphosate to have it dry evenly so they can harvest it more readily. They don't have to wait.
Yeah. Yeah, and
And
it's something that they haven't done throughout time. This is a
yeah,
relatively new practice. So,
yeah,
uh, and so you'll talk to a lot of farmers like Farmer Bob Quinn or some of
yeah.
these famous organic farmers are like, well, and I'm like, well, what I asked, what can people do? And he said, well, just don't spray it. You just do it like people have throughout time.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's just a shortcut.
Yeah,
It's
it's
a
just a shortcut
shortcut with poison.
with
So,
poison
yeah,
directly into our pantry.
yeah. Well, Kelly, I just saw something the other day. Organic consumers put something out, and others organizations may have too, about the approval of the HB4 GMO wheat, which is not being done yet in the U.S. Is that correct?
That is not being done. I think it was approved in 2024 for use, but it has not been planted yet.
Okay.
Uh, but this is such a bad idea. And throughout, since the beginning of GMOs, so the 90s, there's been various attempts to and proposals to have GMO wheat. And I actually didn't know there wasn't GMO wheat. I just kind of assumed that there was until about 10 years ago when I started looking into wheat. But
Yeah,
that is
me
one
too. Me
crop that
too.
we don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I thought, okay, well, that's good because there are some farmers like, and actually, the famous critic of glyphosate, Dr. Don Huber,
Right.
he said that he actually thought that some of the test plots that were around, that they were testing some here and there. But
Yeah.
anyway, it never been mainstreamed. And so then Argentina developed this one that is tolerant to glufosinate. And
And can you explain what glufosinate is?
yeah, glufosinate is another chemical, another weed killer that is also highly toxic. It actually is especially toxic. This is something to know for your landscaping because you can use it as a landscaper too. It's especially toxic to dogs. So you can have really horrible situation if you have dogs that are exposed to glufosinate. But it's not as widely studied as glyphosate, but it certainly has negative health impacts, and it's not
Well, this
something.
article, and I'm not saying that it's accurate or anything, it said it was 166 times more toxic than glyphosate in
Well,
terms
there you
of
go.
long-term exposure. So, I don't know, if that's 100% accurate, but I know it's not good.
No, it's really not good, and bringing in something even more. And the reason why my guess is, I'm sure this is why, the reason why they would have it resistant to glufosinate, not glyphosate, is because weeds are outthinking glyphosate now. So glyphosate isn't as effective as it was in the beginning because they've become resistant to it, which I
Yeah.
love. So now you have these super weeds, and I'm like, oh, I
Yeah.
wish humans could do that. You know,
Yeah.
outthink.
Yeah.
So, but the truth is, we don't need GMO wheat. Like that is not something that we are needing. That over and over, these companies claim that we need it because of drought and being drought tolerant. Over and over, it's proven that's not even true. That it's better in a drought. If
Yeah.
anything, actually, the sprays that go around these GMOs are completely draining all life out of our soil, and so then it can't absorb the water. It's worse in a drought.
Yeah.
So this is just an introduction to disaster. It's also had no tests whatsoever on human health, and it won't have tests by the time it comes out. And actually, this is something I've tried to raise to the top as well, because that is something that should. So one of the things that they're trying to do out of HHS is to revamp the GRAS loophole, which is the generally recognized as safe loophole. That is a way that chemical companies, but mostly food companies, have been able to get their ingredients into food products. So some of these things that we can't even pronounce, they'll claim that it's safe, and that there's no testing done by the FDA. The FDA takes the word of the corporation, says, okay, then like let it on in. So they're talking now at HHS about closing that GRAS loophole, and GMOs fall under that. So
That would be
GMOs have been approved
great.
into our food supply because they were claiming to be generally recognized as safe, not materially different than the natural kind. But this might actually be a problem for the GMO manufacturers if that loophole is closed.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. We keep getting hopeful for things happening, and then the opposite happens, and it's like one step forward and two steps backwards sometimes. But we got to keep going. We can't just give up and say, "Oh well, have your way." We gotta keep fighting this, which is exactly what you're doing. So,
We do have to
what's
keep fighting.
happening in the with your American Regeneration? What are you working on?
So we are really excited. This is the bright news, and this is one of the reasons why I actually have started really focusing on agriculture because, and you know this, Carol, because you're living amongst farmland. There's something so incredibly naturally gratifying about coming up with the solution that's so beautiful in nature, and so that's really filling me up. And I co-founded with Ryland Engelhart, who was also the founder of Kiss the Ground, and we came up with this group, American Regeneration, and we have a large advisory group of just the best regenerative farmers in our country. They are advising us on policy ideas and proposals that we can make all the way up to the top now with this access that we have through the Kennedy campaign and others, and trying to recommend different aspects to policy that would be beneficial. But not only that, but we're also starting to think about working on the state level, like in Texas, which actually is where Ryland is located. He moved from California and he bought a ranch with his sister, who's a farmer. And it's called Sovereignty Ranch, and it's out in Bandera, Texas, and it's very cool. It has a great restaurant if you guys are ever in the Texas area.
Yeah. What
So
what city is it near?
Bandera, Texas. So it's about an hour away from San Antonio,
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah.
um, in the hill country.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and actually, this is a bright spot since we're looking for some in Texas. A regenerative leaning ag secretary for the state of Texas just beat out the incumbent that was fully an ag chem person, and no one could believe it. And Texas is just moving very quickly to start understanding and passing different laws that are they're pro health MAHA types of laws.
Yeah.
And so having on board an ag secretary there, we're just so excited about. So really,
Yeah.
we're working on just we're going to do some field days and bring some of the staffers from the different congressional offices out onto an actual regenerative farm so they can understand it. Because what we're finding in all of our discussions throughout DC is that hardly anyone understands what regenerative agriculture is.
Yeah.
They don't even really understand the problem to begin with our current agriculture system. And so that education gap is one we're trying to fill.
That's great. Yeah. Education is the key. That's really exciting news. So, Keller, you're always just a wealth of knowledge, and I wanted to have you on today just to see where we were at with the glyphosate, and hoping for a little bit better news, but we'll keep going. And I love what you're doing with American Regeneration, and that's a really positive thing. So if people want to learn more about that, do you have a website, or how can they
Yes,
find
yes.
out
So
more?
please go to americanregeneration.org and you can see who we are and who we're working with. If you want to get in touch, my email is on there. And also something to flag. A bunch of us are hosting an enormous rally at the Supreme Court on April 27th
Oh
in
yeah, I wanted to
DC.
ask you about that. Thanks for so
Yeah.
say more about that.
So first of all, I think this is one aspect to Bayer's tactic that I didn't mention. So there's a Supreme, so this glyphosate case now has basically gotten to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
So the Supreme Court is going to decide if the EPA says something is safe, then can you sue the manufacturer? So if the EPA says the glyphosate is safe, Bayer wants it that we cannot sue because EPA said it doesn't cause cancer. So this is the big pesticide liability shield Supreme Court case. And we don't like it. And the first day is on April 27th. And so we are calling everyone for the rally. We are calling it the People versus Poison. This is a bipartisan event. We'll have all sides and everyone and anyone who just is tired of pesticides and the poisoning to come out, and we're going to rally, and we're going to hopefully make it so that inside of the Supreme Court they hear our shouts.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, we're not going to be silenced, that's for sure.
No.
Yeah, that's amazing. And if the EPA says so, if anybody wants to know more about the EPA, you might want to check out my interview with Evangelos Valianatos. Can't believe I remembered that name. And his book is Poison Springs. And he was an employee of the EPA, and you get to learn a lot about the EPA by reading his book. So, unfortunately, not a whole lot has changed since then.
No, in fact, it feels maybe even worse. Probably the
Yeah,
same, but maybe
yeah.
feels a little bit worse.
Well, anyway, Kelly, thank you so much for being on the show. It's just always a pleasure to have you on, and keep up your great work.
Thank you. You too.
Okay, thanks.